We have 44 nations in Europe, and they're broken up into two charts, one with larger populations, above 500,000, and then smaller nations, less than 500,000, and classified whether they use the euro for their currency, and whether they're members of NATO. So this question is just asking what percent of nations in Europe have a national population less than 500,000. So that would be all these. So we know that there are 44 altogether. And how many here are there? Well, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 5, that's 8. So it's going to be 8 over 44. And this simplifies, of course, we can divide top and bottom by 2. We get 2 over 11. When we figure that out on a calculator, we get 0.181818 repeating, which is about 18%. Answer choice A. All right, so these charts summarize 44 nations in Europe and breaks it into larger nations and smaller nations, more than 500,000, and it tells us whether they're NATO members or not and whether they use the euro or not. So this question says, of nations with national populations of more than 500,000 people. So right there, we're not even looking at this bottom. We're only looking at the top. What percent of European nations in this category are neither members of NATO nor primary users of the euro? All right, well, very interesting. Well, first of all, what's the whole? How many folks are there? Well, 9 plus 11 is 20. Plus 10 is 30. Plus 6 is 36. So there are 36. That's the whole. And the part are the people that are not NATO members and not using the euro, and the intersection of that is right there. So it's 11 out of 36. So 11 out of 36 is slightly smaller than a third. 12 out of 36 would be a third. And so this is going to be slightly less than a third. So we know those answers aren't right. On the calculator, if we calculate this, 11 divided by 36, we get 0.30555 repeating, which would round up to about 3.1, which is 31%. Answer choice C. In these charts, we have 44 nations in Europe divided into two categories. The larger ones, larger than 500,000, and the smaller ones, populations less than 500,000, and then classified according to whether they use the euro and whether they're members of NATO. So this question is asking, of all the nations with populations greater than 500,000, so we're not even looking at the ones in the bottom, who are not members of NATO. So we're really only looking at this column, the folks who are not members of NATO. Approximately what percent of them use the euro as their primary currency? So there are 6 plus 11, 17 there. That's the total. And of those 17, 6 of them use the euro. 6 of them are in the euro column. So 6 over 17. Well, we know 6 over 18 is 1/3, which would be 33%. 6 over 17 make the denominator smaller. That's going to be slightly bigger than 33%. We suspect it's going to be 35%, and indeed when we do 6 divided by 17 on our calculator, we get 0.3529, so that's very close to 35%. Answer choice B. Here we have 44 nations of Europe, and they're classified in these two charts, the smaller nations below 500,000 in the lower chart, larger nations above 500,000 in the upper chart, and classified whether they are NATO members and whether they use the euro. So this question is basically a read off the chart question. How many nations in Europe have a population of more than 500,000? So right away, we're not looking at this lower one, we're looking at the upper one. Are members of NATO, so we're looking in this top row, and do not use the euro as their primary currency. So we're looking in this column, and it's really only this box right here, and so it's those 9 countries. And so we're just reading right off the box. The answer is 9. Here we have the 44 nations of Europe, classified according to whether they are smaller nations, that is below 500,000 in population, or larger nations in the upper chart that are above 500,000, and classified about whether they are NATO members or not, and whether the euro is their principal currency or not. So this question is interesting. Tells us the single nation in the upper right-hand box of the lower chart. So here's the lower chart, the upper right-hand box. So this box right here could be which of the following? Well, first of all, it is a NATO member. So we'll cross out the one that's not a NATO member. It does not use the euro, whatever that country is. So we can cross out any of the countries that use the euro. And also, its population is below 500,000, so we can cross out any country that is larger than 500,000. And the only country that remains a possibility is Iceland. Answer choice A. Here we have the 44 nations of Europe, classified according to larger or smaller nations, whether their population is above or below 500,000, and whether they are NATO members and whether they use the euro. So this particular question is very interesting. What is the least number of nations currently not members of NATO that would have to join NATO so that more than 50% of the nations in Europe would be members of NATO? Well, right now, we know there are 44. And so if there were 22 members, that would be exactly 50%. If we want to have more than 50%, we'd have to have at least 23. So that is the target. How would we get up to 23? Well, how many are NATO members now? We have 10 plus 9, 19, 20, 21. All of those are the NATO members. And so there are 21 now. We want to get up to 23, so we would have to add 2. We'd need two countries that are not NATO members to become NATO members, and then the majority of the countries would be NATO members. And so the answer is 2. Answer choice B.